At 18, I was a CPS agent posing as a traumatized 12-year-old foster child to investigate the Ericksons after 3 children mysteriously died in their care. On my first night, Mrs. Erickson locked me in the basement with only a bucket for a toilet and told me I would earn my food through good behavior. When Mr. Erickson began visiting the basement to describe exactly how the other foster children had their accidents, I understood why none of them had survived to testify. I arrived at the Ericksons' house with a black eye, dirty hair, and a trash bag full of second-hand clothes that smelled of cigarette smoke. My social worker, Elizabeth, knocked on the door of their suburban home while I huddled behind her, perfectly playing the part of a traumatized 12-year-old. In reality, I was 18 and part of the youngest undercover operation CPS had ever approved. Mrs. Erickson's smile vanished the moment she saw me. She glanced at my torn sneakers and the bruises I carefully applied with makeup, and her entire body language changed. Without even introducing herself, she told Elizabeth to simply leave the paperwork on the porch. Elizabeth's voice remained professional as she explained that I would need to be shown to my room and given the house rules. Ms. Erickson rolled her eyes and said she had handled dozens of children like me before and knew the procedure. When Elizabeth reached out to say goodbye, giving me a firm handshake before leaving, Ms. Erickson physically stepped between us, pulled out hand sanitizer, and pumped it aggressively while explaining that foster children often carried illnesses. I tried to speak, practicing the frightened whisper we'd rehearsed. Mrs. Erickson interrupted me with a sharp laugh. "I've heard all the manipulation tactics in the book, so don't even try that innocent girl act on me." He grabbed my trash bag and held it at a distance, leading me inside. Mr. Erickson emerged from the kitchen and looked me up and down like I was cattle. "Another runaway?" he asked his wife. She shrugged and said, probably based on the black eye. She dropped my bag on the floor and used her foot to push it toward the basement door. "Your room is downstairs," she announced. "It's not a bedroom, it's a basement." He switched on a single bare light bulb that illuminated concrete walls and a stained mattress on the floor. "The bathroom is upstairs, but that's for the family," he said. He pointed to a bucket in the corner. "You'll manage with that." The teddy bear he carried under his arm, the one item he'd fought to keep, recorded everything through its hidden camera lens. He showed me the lock on the outside of the door. "For your protection," he said, demonstrating how it clicked. "Foster children sleepwalk. We can't have you wandering around our children's rooms." At dinner, I sat on the floor in the corner while the Erickson family ate hot roast at their dining room table. Mrs. Erickson tossed me a piece of bread and a glass of water without looking. "You earn better food with good behavior," she said. Her biological daughter, Bethany, laughed. It took the latter 3 weeks to earn peanut butter. I reached for the bread, but Mr. Erickson hit my hand so hard it left a mark. "Say please first," he ordered. "Just because you were raised like an animal doesn't mean you'll act like one here." My supervisor had warned me it would be bad. 3 children had died in this house over 5 years, all ruled accidents, but experiencing it was different from reading the files. That night, locked in the basement, I activated the emergency recorder sewn into the stomach of my teddy bear. Every sound would be transmitted directly to CPS headquarters. The real torture began on the 3rd. Mrs. Erickson decided I smelled bad. She stripped me naked in the backyard and sprayed me with ice-cold water while her children watched from the window. "We can't have you contaminating our shower," he explained to the neighbors who peered over the fence. "These kids come from horrible places." When I shivered, he sprayed me right in the face. I made sure the camera in my teddy bear captured her smile. She started withholding food as punishment for imaginary transgressions. Just looking at her children was worth skipping breakfast. Speaking without permission meant no lunch. By day 5, I was dizzy with hunger, playing the part a little too well. But it was Mr. Erickson who really chilled me to the bone. He would wait until his wife went shopping before visiting the basement. He would sit on the stairs and describe what happened to the other foster children. How one fell down these very stairs, how another accidentally drank cleaning fluid, how a third got lost and was found in the river. Foster children are so clumsy, he would say, taking out his knife to clean his fingernails. So many accidents happen when no one is paying attention. On the 7th, they escalated to physical abuse. Mrs. Erickson discovered I had hidden a granola bar in my pillowcase. One her daughter, Bethany, had secretly given me out of pity. He grabbed my hair and dragged me upstairs. My teddy bear fell and bounced behind us, still recording. He called me a thief, a liar, proof that foster children are genetically damaged. He made me stand in the corner of the kitchen for 6 hours. When I swayed from exhaustion, he banged a pot next to my head. His children ate ice cream at the table, laughing every time I shuddered. When I finally collapsed, Mr. Erickson grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back. 3 more babies are coming next month, he whispered. More checks. Did things have changed for you by then? That's when I heard sirens outside. Through the window, I saw 2 police cars and a CPS van. Someone had called about an abusive foster family. My supervisor's voice crackled through the emergency earpiece hidden in my hair. The Ericksons froze at the sound of car doors slamming shut outside. Mrs. Erickson let go of my hair and ran to the window. His face drained of color as he counted the vehicles. Mr. Erickson's knife clattered to the floor. I huddled on the kitchen tiles, maintaining my cover even as relief washed over me. The teddy bear leaned sideways against the wall, its camera eye capturing Mrs. Erickson's panicked movements. As she grabbed kitchen towels and frantically wiped down the counters, Mr. Erickson kicked a knife under the refrigerator and smoothed down his shirt. Heavy footsteps echoed up the porch steps. The doorbell rang 3 times in quick succession, followed by authoritative knocks. Mrs. Erickson shot me a look of pure venom before putting on her fake smile and opening the door. Detective Martinez was standing in the doorway with 2 uniformed officers flanking him. Behind them, I recognized Sarah Chin from CPS, though she gave no indication that she knew me. Her expression remained professionally neutral as she held the official paperwork. Mrs. Erickson's voice became high and sweet. She welcomed them inside, explaining that there must have been some misunderstanding. She had been a foster mother for 15 years with an exemplary record. Mr. Erickson nodded, adding that they had helped dozens of troubled children. Detective Martinez's eyes scanned the kitchen and settled on me. I remained motionless on the floor, letting him take in my disheveled appearance, the red marks on my arms, the way I flinched when Mr. Erickson shifted his weight. The detective's jaw tightened. Sarah Chin asked to see my accommodations. Mrs. Erickson hesitated. Then she led the group toward the basement door, chattering about how they had converted the space especially for foster children who needed structure. He struggled with a lock on the outside of the door, trying to explain it as a security measure. The officers got out first. I heard one of them swear under his breath when he saw the bucket in the corner. Sarah Chin documented everything on her phone as Mrs. Erickson's explanations grew more frantic. The stained mattress, the bare light bulb, the windowless concrete walls. Upstairs, Detective Martinez crouched beside me. He asked if I was hurt, if I needed medical attention. I shook my head slightly, staying in character as a traumatized child. He helped me sit against the wall and noticed the teddy bear. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment before she stood up. Bethany and her younger brother appeared in the doorway, still holding their bowls of ice cream. They watched the scene unfolding in their kitchen. Bethany's face had gone pale, the spoon trembling in her hand. Her brother whispered something about the foster child, getting them into trouble. Mrs. Erickson emerged from the basement, her fake smile cracking at the edges. She launched into a rant about difficult children, making false accusations for attention. I'd seen it before. Foster children will say anything to be moved to a new home. The officer surely understood. Sarah Chin interrupted to ask about my meals. Where did I eat? What had I been given? Mrs. Erickson pointed vaguely to the kitchen table, stating that I ate with the family. His own daughter's eyes widened at the lie. Detective Martinez noticed Bethany's reaction. He approached her gently, asking if she would like to speak with him in the living room. Mrs. Erickson moved to intervene, but an officer stepped between them. Bethany glanced at me, then at her mother, before following the detective out of the kitchen. Mr. Erickson's calm facade finally cracked. He demanded to know who had called with this false report. He would sue for defamation. This was harassment of respectable citizens. His voice rose with each word until he was practically shouting about his rights. An officer suggested he calm down. Mr. Erickson took a step toward him, his fists clenched. Two officers immediately moved to restrain him, even though he hadn't completely crossed the line into assault. The tension in the kitchen intensified. Through the door, I could see Bethany speaking quietly with Detective Martinez. Her hands twisted in her lap as she glanced back toward the kitchen. Whatever she was saying made the detective's expression grow darker by the second. Mrs. Erickson must have sensed the change, too. Suddenly, she remembered some urgent paperwork in her home office that would clear up this misunderstanding. She tried to leave the kitchen, but Sarah Chin politely insisted she stay while they completed their investigation. The basement door opened again. An officer emerged carrying my trash bag of belongings. Behind him, another officer held bags of evidence. Through the clear plastic, I could see the photographed and labeled bin. They had found other things, including scratch marks on the door frame, what looked like dried blood on the concrete floor. Mr. Erickson's screams intensified. This was planted evidence. The foster child had done this herself. They all did. Sympathy-induced self-harm. I'd seen it dozens of times. His wife nodded frantically, adding her own accusations about my manipulative behavior. Detective Martinez returned to the kitchen with Bethany following behind. She didn't want to look her parents in the eye. The detective announced that I would be taken for a medical evaluation and emergency placement. The investigation would continue, and the Ericksons should expect further contact. Mrs. Erickson's mask finally slipped completely off. She pointed at me, screaming that I had destroyed her family. She was ungrateful trash that bit the hand that fed her. She didn't know how lucky she was. Other foster children had had it much worse. At least she had given me a roof over my head and food. Sarah Chin helped me to my feet. I clutched my teddy bear, making sure her camera captured Mrs. Erickson's collapse. Mr. Erickson made one last attempt to assert control, blocking our path to the door. He insisted on speaking with supervisors, lawyers, anyone who would listen to reason. The officers firmly moved him aside. As Sarah led the way, Mr. Erickson leaned in close enough for me to smell his coffee breath. His whisper was too quiet for anyone else to hear, but the sensitive microphone in my teddy bear would pick up every word about what was happening to the talking children. Outside, the night air felt like freedom, though I had to keep my cover up. Neighbors had gathered in their yards, phones out recording everything. Mrs. Erickson's reputation in the community was crumbling in real time. Sarah helped me into the CPS van. Through the window, I saw officers leading Mr. Erickson away in handcuffs. He had finally crossed the line, pushing an officer as he tried to reach me. Mrs. Erickson continued shrieking about lawsuits and trumped-up arrests. As we walked away, I caught a glimpse of Bethany at her bedroom window. She raised her hand slightly, perhaps an apology, perhaps a goodbye. Her younger brother stood beside her, still baffled as to why the foster child had ruined everything. The SUV drove 3 blocks before pulling into an empty parking lot. Sarah Chin turned to face me, her professional demeanor crumbling. He squeezed my shoulder and told me I'd done an incredible job. The evidence I'd gathered would ensure the Ericksons would never be foster parents again. But this was just the beginning. There would be formal statements, medical documentation, and careful coordination to maintain my story of coverage. The Ericksons still had connections, lawyers, and a history of making problems disappear. We would need every piece of evidence to make this stick. Sarah Chin drove us to a safe house 20 minutes away, an unremarkable apartment building where CPS conducted reports. My supervisor was waiting inside, pacing the small living room with a tablet showing real-time uploads of the teddy bear. He gave me a brief hug before we got to work, documenting everything while the memories were still fresh. The medical examiner arrived within the hour. He photographed every bruise, every mark, carefully distinguishing between the makeup I had applied and the actual wounds the Ericksons had inflicted. His gentle hands cataloged the handprint on my wrist from Mr. Erickson's grip, the scalp tenderness from Mrs. Erickson dragging me by the hair, the dehydration from systematic food deprivation. My supervisor reviewed the footage while I showered, days of filth. The hot water stung my raw skin, but I tasted luxury after that bucket in the basement. When I came out, she showed me what the bear had caught. Mrs. Erickson's cruelty was on full display. Mr. Erickson's threats echoed through the apartment's speakers. Even Bethany's conflicted expressions were clearly visible. Sarah Chin returned with troubling news. The Ericksons had already contacted their lawyer, a family friend who had helped them navigate previous investigations. They claimed I was a troubled teenager who had staged the whole thing for attention. Their biological children would testify about my erratic behavior. Without the recordings, it would be her word against mine. We spent the night preparing my official statement. Every detail had to align with what a traumatized 12-year-old girl would remember and articulate. Too much precision would seem rehearsed. Too little would leave gaps that his lawyer could exploit. I practiced trembling, stuttering, and shedding tears at strategic moments. The morning brought complications. The Ericksons' lawyer had filed an emergency motion, claiming that CPS had violated protocol by removing me without proper documentation. He argued that the basement setup was a therapeutic environment for children with behavioral problems. The lock was for security. The bucket was a temporary measure while plumbing repairs were scheduled. My supervisor slammed his fist on the table when he heard that 3 children had died in the Ericksons' care. But her lawyer had turned each tragedy into an unfortunate accident involving troubled youths. The system that should have protected children, instead, protected their killers through bureaucratic loopholes. Sarah Chin coordinated with Detective Martinez to strengthen our case. They needed Bethany's testimony, but her parents had already begun their manipulation. Through the apartment window, I saw news vans arrive at the Erickson house. Their lawyer was in the yard portraying them as victims of a vindictive child and an overly jealous CPS. The counterattack came swiftly. Mrs. Erickson appeared on local morning shows, tears streaming down her face as she described her family's dedication to helping troubled children. She showed photos of smiling foster children from years past, conveniently omitting the 3 who never made it out alive. His performance was masterful, turning public opinion against CPS. My supervisor decided we needed more evidence. The recordings were damning, but the Ericksons' lawyer would challenge their admissibility. He arranged for me to give a formal video deposition that afternoon, maintaining my cover as a 12-year-old victim while ensuring every detail was officially recorded. During the preparations, Sarah Chin's phone rang constantly. Other foster children who had survived the Erickson house were reaching out, encouraged by news of the investigation. Their stories painted a pattern of escalating abuse that the system had ignored for years. One boy described being locked in the basement for a week. One girl recounted being forced to eat rotten food as punishment. The video deposition took place in a sterile conference room. I sat across from a juvenile defense attorney while cameras recorded my every word. I let my voice tremble as I described the basement, the cube, the systematic starvation. When they asked me about the teddy bear, I clutched it tightly and explained how it was my only comfort in that dark place. Midway through, the Ericksons' lawyer burst in, demanding to question me. My supervisor blocked his path, but the man's presence genuinely unsettled me. He resembled Mr. Erickson in his calculated coldness, the kind of guy who saw foster children as disposable sources of income rather than human beings. Security removed him, but the damage was done. He had visibly flinched on camera, lending credibility to his claim that she was an unstable teenager rather than a trained operative. My supervisor called for a break, reminding me that showing vulnerability actually strengthened our case. Real victims didn't maintain perfect composure. That night, Detective Martinez visited with troubling updates. The Ericksons had hired a private investigator to look into my past. If they discovered my real age or my status as a CPS operative, the entire case would collapse. Worse, it would taint every future investigation involving undercover work. We accelerated our timeline. Sarah Chen filed emergency paperwork to formalize the evidence before the Ericksons could discredit it. My supervisor arranged for the teddy bear recordings to be authenticated by technical experts who could testify to their integrity. Every minute counted as her lawyer mounted an aggressive defense. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Bethany Erickson called the CPS helpline at midnight, whispering through tears. Her parents had threatened to send her to boarding schools, and she was testifying against them. She had seen what they did to foster children who crossed their paths. She was terrified of becoming their next victim. Detective Martinez picked her up from a friend's house where she had fled. In the safety of the police station, she revealed years of witnessing abuse. She had tried to help previous foster children, secretly bringing them food, just as she had done with me. Each time, her parents punished her severely, and the foster children would disappear shortly afterward. Her testimony was devastating. She described seeing her father push a foster child down the basement stairs. She later claimed she had tripped. She had seen her mother force-feed a girl cleaning chemicals as punishment for lying about the abuse. The third death, a drowning, occurred during a family camping trip where no foster child should have been allowed to wander alone. Mrs. Erickson's public image crumbled when police arrested her at the television studio where she had scheduled another sympathy interview. Footage of her being handcuffed, fully made up and wearing pearls, was played on every local channel. Mr. Erickson tried to flee but was apprehended at the state line with a car full of shredded documents. His lawyer jumped ship, suddenly reminded of ethical obligations that hadn't bothered him while defending child murderers. The private investigator found nothing about my true identity. My supervisor's careful preparation had created an airtight backstory. Public opinion shifted as more survivors came forward with their stories. The way Bethany finally called that helpline at 2 a.m. makes me wonder how long she'd been building up the courage. What specific moment pushed her to finally pick up that phone? I maintained my cover throughout, playing the traumatized girl in every public appearance. During the Ericksons' bail hearing, I sat in the front row of the gallery, teddy bear on my lap, letting them see the 12-year-old girl they had terrorized. Mrs. Erickson's mask slipped as our eyes met pure hatred flashing across her face. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and danger to the community. As the officers led them away, Mr. Erickson turned one last time. His expression promised retribution if he ever went free. I hugged my teddy bear tighter, knowing his camera had captured his threat for the permanent record. Sarah Chen worked tirelessly, building an airtight case. The forensic team found DNA evidence in the basement of the 3 deceased children, contradicting the Ericksons' claims that they had never been confined there. Financial records showed that they had collected over $500,000 in foster care payments, while spending almost nothing on the children's needs. My supervisor was concerned about my psychological state. Experiencing abuse, even as a trained operative, left scars. He arranged counseling sessions where I could stop acting out and process the trauma. The therapist specialized in undercover work, understanding the unique toll of maintaining false identities while experiencing real suffering. 2 weeks into the investigation, we faced a setback. The Ericksons' new lawyer filed a motion alleging entrapment, arguing that CPS had deliberately placed me there to fabricate evidence. If he succeeded, it would invalidate everything we had gathered. My supervisor spent sleepless nights crafting responses that would protect the covert operation while maintaining my cover. Detective Martinez discovered something crucial in the shredded documents Mr. Erickson had tried to destroy. Armed together, they uncovered correspondence with other foster parents, sharing discipline techniques and strategies for avoiding CPS scrutiny. The network was small but devastating, turning foster care into a coordinated system of abuse. We couldn't pursue the wider network without compromising my identity, but Detective Martinez passed the information on to federal authorities for a separate investigation. My mission focused solely on the Ericksons, building such overwhelming evidence that no jury could acquit them. The other foster children in their care were immediately rehomed. Sarah Chen personally oversaw each placement, ensuring they went to thoroughly vetted families. Some required extensive therapy after years of abuse. Others, like Bethany's younger brother, seemed oblivious to the full horror, shielded by his sister's interventions. Bethany herself voluntarily entered protective custody. Her testimony made her a target for her parents' remaining supporters, people who still believed the Ericksons were martyrs persecuted by an overbearing government. She lived temporarily with Sarah Chun, slowly deprogramming herself from years of normalized abuse. My public appearances became carefully orchestrated events. We couldn't risk the Ericksons' investigators catching me off guard or noticing inconsistencies in my behavior. Every interview, every court appearance required extensive preparation to maintain the traumatized child persona while providing necessary testimony. The forensic evidence piled up. The basement yielded DNA, fingerprints, and scratch marks consistent with prolonged confinement. Analysis of the cube's contents confirmed that multiple children had been forced to use it for extended periods. Even the stained mattress told stories of suffering through biological evidence. Ms. Erickson's past revealed troubling patterns. She had worked in a group home in her 20s, where 3 children died under suspicious circumstances. Each death was ruled accidental, but the similarities to our case were undeniable. He had honed his techniques over decades, learning exactly how far to push without leaving actionable evidence. Mr. Erickson's story was equally murky. Former employers described him as controlling and vindictive, with a particular hatred for anyone he considered inferior. His knife collection, confiscated during the arrest, included several weapons consistent with wounds found on the deceased foster children. 3 weeks after the initial arrest, we faced our biggest challenge. The Ericksons' attorney located a former foster child willing to testify on their behalf. The young men claimed they had saved his life by providing the structure and discipline he needed. We suspected coaching or bribery, but we couldn't prove it without compromising the investigation. My supervisor made a difficult decision. We would reveal select portions of the teddy bear recordings to counter this testimony, not enough to expose the entire surveillance operation, but enough to demonstrate the Ericksons' cruelty. Technical experts testified that the recordings were authentic, unedited, and clearly showed systematic abuse. The defense witness crumbled under cross-examination. Detective Martinez had discovered financial transfers from the Ericksons' lawyer's account to the young man's account. Confronted with evidence of bribery, he admitted he had been paid to lie. His actual experience at home matched the pattern of abuse we had documented. As the case built toward trial, I struggled with the approaching end of my assignment. Soon I would have to give up cover, return to my real age and identity. The thought terrified me more than the basement. For weeks, I had lived as this vulnerable child, experiencing trauma that felt all too real despite my training. My supervisor recognized the signs of going too deep undercover. He arranged a gradual transition, allowing me to slowly reclaim my adult identity in safe spaces. While maintaining cover publicly, the therapist worked with me on integration techniques, helping me separate the persona from my true self. Sarah Chin became a crucial support during this period. She had seen operatives struggle with identity after long assignments and knew the importance of maintaining connections to reality. We spent hours discussing the case from an adult perspective, analyzing the Erikson psychology and the systemic failures that enabled them. The grand jury's indictment landed like thunder. 3 counts of murder, dozens of counts of child abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy. The Eriksons faced life imprisonment and were convicted on all counts. Their lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor refused anything less than full responsibility. Bethany's courage inspired other witnesses. Foster children from across the state came forward with stories about the Eriksons and their network. The investigation expanded far beyond our original scope. Although my involvement remained limited to our specific case, the teddy bear had started something much larger than we had anticipated. Preparing for trial meant reliving every moment of abuse. I practiced testimony with prosecutors who needed me to stay in character on the stand. The defense would attack my credibility by trying to portray me as an adult operative. One slip-up could destroy everything we had built. My supervisor created contingency plans. If my coverage was exposed during a trial, we had documentation proving that the abuse occurred regardless of my age. The other witnesses, the physical evidence, and Bethany's testimony could have carried the case without me, but we all knew my testimony was the cornerstone. 6 weeks after that night in the basement, we learned that Mr. Erikson had suffered a heart attack in custody. His attorney tried to use this for sympathy, claiming that the stress of false accusations was killing an innocent man. Medical records revealed years of untreated conditions, likely due to the same arrogance that led him to believe he was untouchable. Mrs. Erikson turned against him from her cell, offering to testify about his role in the murders in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecutor listened but made no promises. Her attempts to save herself by sacrificing her husband only reinforced her calculating nature. She would have thrown anyone under the bus to avoid consequences. The trial date approached like a storm on the horizon. Every piece of evidence was cataloged. Every witness prepared. The teddy bear sat in an evidence locker, its camera eye dark, but its recordings preserved forever. Those silent observations would speak louder than any testimony, revealing the truth. My final preparation session focused on maintaining composure under hostile cross-examination. The defense would try to break me, to force an admission that I was older, trained, and planted. I practiced breathing techniques, emotional regulation, and the subtle differences between a 12-year-old victim and an 18-year-old operative. Sarah Chin delivered news that strengthened our resolve. 2 of the 3 deceased foster children had living relatives who had been searching for them for years. The Eriksons had concealed their deaths through forged documents and lies. These families would finally have closure and justice for their lost children. The night before the trial, I sat with my supervisor, going over everything one last time. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me. 3 dead children depended on my actions. Today's foster children needed the reform system. The future victims demanded that the Eriksons be permanently detained. As dawn broke on the day of the trial, I was transformed once again into that frightened 12-year-old girl. The makeup artist carefully applied subtle touches that made me look younger, more vulnerable. I clutched the teddy bear that had been my silent witness, ready to speak for those who could no longer. The courthouse doors swung open before me as we entered through the back entrance. My supervisor took his position in the gallery, while Sarah Chin led me to the witness waiting room. The teddy bear remained pressed tightly against my chest. Its weight was both comforting and heavy, a burden I carried. Through the small window, I watched the Ericksons enter in orange jumpsuits. Mrs. Erickson had lost weight. Her perfect suburban mother facade was replaced by hollow cheeks and dark circles, suggesting she was playing the long game. This operative had been working harder than someone trying to win an Oscar, all while solving crimes and saving lives. Mr. Erickson crept beside her, his imposing presence diminished after weeks in custody. They sat at the defense table without recognizing each other. The prosecutor called me first. I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, maintaining my frightened little girl persona as my training kept me focused. The marshal helped me adjust the microphone as I settled into the chair, teddy bear on my lap. The initial questions established my identity and my connection to the Ericksons. I answered in a small voice, occasionally glancing at my former captors. Mrs. Erickson glared at me with daggers, while Mr. Erickson examined his wives. The prosecutor guided me through the chronology of abuse, allowing me to describe each incident without interruption. When we arrived at the basement jail, I gripped my teddy bear tighter. The prosecutor requested permission to play excerpts from the recordings. The judge agreed over objections from the defense. Ms. Erickson's voice filled the courtroom, dripping with cruelty as she explained the cube system. Several jurors visibly recoiled. Cross-examination followed. The defense attorney approached with calculated friendliness, trying to establish rapport. He asked about my past, probing for inconsistencies. I stuck to my cover story, adding stammers and tears at appropriate moments. Her frustration grew as I maintained the act of a traumatized child. She changed tactics, suggesting I had misunderstood the Ericksons' methods of discipline. Perhaps the basement was simply a timeout space. Perhaps the food restrictions were dietary concerns. I shook my head at each suggestion, describing the reality of drinking from buckets and eating moldy bread. The lawyer pressed harder, implying that I had faked injuries for attention. She produced photos of me from the first day, pointing out the makeup bruises. I admitted some were fake, explaining how I tried to hide real abuse, adding fake marks, hoping someone would notice the difference. The jury seemed to buy the explanation. Bethany testified next. She entered the courtroom avoiding her parents' eyes, her hands trembling as she took the oath. Her testimony corroborated mine, while adding horrifying details about previous foster children. She described finding bloody towels after her father's discipline sessions and hearing screams from the basement at night. The defense tried to portray her as a rebellious daughter seeking revenge. She stood firm, detailing years of witnessing abuse while being threatened into silence. When asked why she hadn't reported it sooner, she described her parents' controlling tactics and threats of boarding school. Detective Martinez methodically presented physical evidence. DNA from deceased foster children found in the basement. Financial records showing systematic theft of foster care funds. The collection of knives with traces of blood. Each piece was built upon the last, creating an overwhelming picture of calculated abuse. The defense's star witness spectacularly crumbled. The young man they had bribed to support the Ericksons broke down under cross-examination, admitting to the payment and describing his actual experiences in their home. Her testimony perfectly matched our pattern, adding another voice to the chorus of victims. Ms. Erickson took the stand against her lawyer's advice. She attempted to portray herself as a misunderstood caregiver dealing with troubled children. His explanations for the basement's layout became increasingly absurd. He claimed the bucket was for emergency bathroom needs during storms. The lock was to prevent sleepwalking accidents. The prosecutor systematically destroyed her credibility. He played recordings of her spraying me while laughing. He showed financial documents proving that she had spent foster care money on jewelry and vacations. Her mask slipped repeatedly as she raged under questioning. Revealing the cruel woman beneath a suburban facade, Mr. Erickson declined to testify. He sat with a stony face as witness after witness described her threats and violence. Former foster children traveled from across the state to share their experiences. Each story reinforced the pattern of escalating abuse that ended in death for those who couldn't escape. The medical examiner's testimony was particularly damning. He explained how the injuries of the 3 deceased children were inconsistent with accidents. Drowning with bruised wrists suggested being held underwater. Ingestion of cleaning fluid with abrasions in the throat indicated force feeding. The fall down the stairs came after defensive wounds to his arms. The closing arguments brought everything full circle. The prosecutor led the jury through 7 years of systematic abuse, 3 murders, and countless traumatized survivors. He held up my teddy bear, explaining how this simple toy had finally given a voice to the voiceless. The defense made one last attempt to create reasonable doubt. They argued about the admissibility of the recordings. They questioned witnesses' motivations and suggested a conspiracy to frame model foster parents. Their arguments felt hollow against the mountain of evidence, and even they seemed to know it. The jury deliberation lasted only 4 hours. We waited in a secure room. My supervisor paced around, while Sarah Chin made phone calls arranging permanent placements for the other foster children. I sat down silently, still in character, despite the exhaustion weighing me down. The verdict came just after lunch. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of 3 children. Dozens of child abuse convictions. Financial fraud. Conspiracy. The judge read each verdict as the Ericksons sat frozen. Mrs. Erickson finally broke down, sobbing theatrically while Mr. Erickson stared straight ahead. The sentence came 2 weeks later. I attended again, watching as the judge handed down 3 consecutive life sentences, plus additional years for abuse and fraud. The Ericksons would never leave prison. Her biological children would live with relatives, receiving therapy to process their trauma. The case made local headlines, but thankfully never became national. Other foster families in her network faced investigation. Although my identity remained protected, the teddy bear that had been my constant companion went to the evidence storage. His work was complete. My supervisor carefully arranged my transition back to normal life. The operation I had experienced as a 12-year-old victim needed me to become an 18-year-old again. We met with a specialized therapist who helped me process the experience without losing myself in the character. Sarah Chin invited me to visit the foster children we had rescued. Seeing them in safe homes, beginning to heal, made every moment of suffering worthwhile. Some recognized me despite my real age, intuitively understanding that I had been their protector in disguise. Bethany reached out through Sarah, wanting to thank me personally. We met at a coffee shop where she was starting over at community college. She apologized for not acting sooner, but I assured her that she had shown incredible courage when it mattered most. The CPS undercover program continued with new security protocols based on my experience. Future operations would have better support systems and clearer extraction procedures. My mission became a template for protecting vulnerable children while maintaining operational safety. 6 months after the trial, I received word that Mr. Erickson had died in prison. Heart failure, the report said. Although the inmates whispered about justice being served by bringing child killers to justice, Ms. Erickson remained in solitary confinement for her own protection, her crimes making her a target. I returned to college, studying social work with a new understanding of the system's failures and possibilities. My classmates never knew about my undercover work, seeing only a dedicated student passionate about child protection. The experience shaped my career choice without defining my entire identity. The families of the 3 murdered children held a memorial service on the anniversary of the verdict. I attended silently, standing at the back as they finally closed up. Their children's names were spoken aloud, their lives honored, their deaths acknowledged as murders rather than accidents. Other survivors reached out over time, forming an informal support network. We shared resources, recommended therapists, and celebrated healing milestones. The shared trauma brought us together as we each found individual paths forward. The foster care system in our state underwent reforms driven by our case. Improved screening procedures, mandatory home visits, and regular check-ins with children became standard. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress built on painful choices. My final session with the specialist therapist focused on integration. The 12-year-old victim I had portrayed would always be a part of me, but I had learned to separate acting from identity. The skills that kept me alive in that basement translated into strength in everyday life. I kept a photo from the mission, not of evidence or abuse, but of the foster children in their new homes, genuinely smiling for the first time in years. It reminded me why operatives like me existed, uniting predators and their prey, bearing witness to ensure no child suffering went unnoticed. My supervisor retired shortly afterward. The Erickson case. His final mission. He had saved countless children throughout his career, but this one had taken its toll. We stayed in touch, 2 people who understood the weight of deception necessary to protect the innocent. The teddy bear's recordings were filed permanently, evidence of evil conquered through patience and courage. Somewhere in storage, that silent witness rested, its work complete. The children it helped save grew up safe, the best possible ending to its story. The Erickson case marked a turning point in the child protection system. Although the case was over, its effects resonated throughout the country, prompting significant reforms in foster care and child protection policies. For me, however, the end of the undercover mission was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life. After the trial, I decided to take time to reflect and heal. Although I had been trained to handle high-stress situations, living in the shoes of a vulnerable and traumatized 12-year-old girl had left deep scars on me. With the help of my therapist, I began working on integrating that experience, learning to separate the character I had played from my true self. During this time, I stayed in touch with Bethany, who had become a close friend. Her courage and determination to testify against her parents deeply inspired me. We decided to support each other in our healing process, and little by little, we rebuilt our lives. One day, while walking through the park near my house, I received an unexpected call. It was Sarah Chun, who informed me that she had received an anonymous letter addressed to me. The letter contained information about another case of child abuse in a foster home in another city. Sarah explained that, although I was no longer officially in the undercover program, my experience and skills could be useful in investigating this new case. Intrigued and with a sense of responsibility, I agreed to review the information. The letter detailed a series of irregularities and abuses at a foster home run by a couple named the Martinezes. According to the letter, the Martinez family had been abusing the children in their care for years, and several of them had mysteriously disappeared. I decided to investigate on my own, without official support from CPS. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't stand idly by while more children were suffering. With the help of Bethany, who had become an expert in computers, we began gathering information about the Martinezes and their foster home. We discovered that the Martinezes had impeccable records in the child protection system, making it difficult to believe they could be capable of such atrocities. However, as we delved deeper into our investigation, we uncovered disturbing patterns. Several children who had been in their care had been transferred to different homes without explanation, and some had disappeared altogether. we decided to infiltrate the Martinez home to gather concrete evidence. Bethany hacked into the CPS system to create a fake identity for me, while I prepared to play the role of a troubled teenager looking for a home. It was an arduous and dangerous process, but we were determined to expose the truth. One night, while the Martinez family was out, we broke into their home. What we found was chilling. In the basement, we discovered a hidden room with dirty beds and chains on the walls. There was evidence that the children had been locked up and abused. We also found documents detailing suspicious financial transactions, suggesting that the Martinez family was receiving payments for each child they took in. While we were searching for more evidence, we heard a noise at the door. It was Mrs. Martinez, who had returned unexpectedly. We hid in the secret room, holding our breath as she searched the house. Fortunately, he didn't discover us, and after what seemed like an eternity, he left. With the evidence in hand, we decided to take the information to the authorities. We knew it was risky, but we couldn't allow the Martinez family to continue their atrocities. We contacted a trusted investigative journalist and gave him all the information we had gathered. He agreed to expose the case in a special report. The report was published a week later, causing a national scandal. The authorities had no choice but to act, and the Martinezes were arrested and brought to trial. During the proceedings, several children who had been in their care testified against them, revealing the horrors they had endured. The Martinezes' trial was closely followed by the media, and public opinion turned against the child protection system. The reforms that had begun after the Erickson case accelerated, and new policies were implemented to ensure the safety and well-being of children in foster care. For me, the exposure of the Martinez case marked the end of my career as an undercover agent. I had risked my life and emotional well-being to protect children, and although it had been worth it, I knew it was time to move on. I decided to dedicate myself to social work, using my experience to help other children in similar situations. Bethany, for her part, decided to study law to become a children's rights lawyer. Together, we continue fighting for justice and the protection of children, albeit from different perspectives. A year after the Martinez trial, I received an unexpected call. It was the journalist who had exposed the case, who informed me that he had received an anonymous letter addressed to me. The letter contained a shocking confession. Mrs. Erickson, who was serving a life sentence in prison, had written a letter detailing the existence of a child trafficking ring in which the Ericksons and the Martinezes had been involved. The letter revealed that children who had disappeared while in the care of the Ericksons and the Martinezes had been sold to an international child trafficking network. Mrs. Erickson, in an attempt to redeem herself, had decided to confess everything she knew, providing names, dates, and key locations. With this new information, I decided to contact the authorities and hand over the letter. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't stand idly by and risk dismantling a child trafficking ring. The authorities took the information seriously and launched a large-scale investigation. The investigation led to the arrest of several people involved in the network, including corrupt officials and wealthy business people. The scandal rocked the country and led to a profound reform of the child protection system, with new policies and protocols to prevent and combat child trafficking. For me, Ms. Erickson's confession marked the end of a dark chapter in my life. I had fought against evil and helped expose the truth, but I had also paid an emotional price. I decided to take a break and travel the world, seeking healing and a new purpose in my life. During my travels, I met a group of volunteers working to protect children in developing countries. Inspired by their work, I decided to join them and use my experience to help the most vulnerable children. It was a transformative experience that allowed me to find new meaning in my life and continue fighting for justice and the protection of children. Years later, I returned to my country and decided to write a book about my experience as an undercover agent. I wanted to share my story and shed light on the horrors many children face in silence. The book became a bestseller and allowed me to continue advocating for child protection and foster care reform. Today, I continue to work in child protection, using my experience and voice to advocate for those who cannot speak for themselves. Although the journey has been difficult and full of challenges, I know I've made a difference in the lives of many children. And that's what truly matters. In an unexpected turn of events, I received a call from Bethany, who informed me that she had received an offer to work at the United Nations, protecting children's rights. It was an incredible opportunity, and although it meant leaving my current life behind, I couldn't turn it down. I accepted the offer and moved to New York to start my new job at the UN. It was a radical change, but I was excited about the opportunity to make a difference on a global scale. Working at the UN, I was able to use my experience and knowledge to advocate for policies and programs that would protect children around the world. One day, while working on a report about child trafficking, I received an unexpected call. It was a colleague from the UN who informed me that he had received information about a child trafficking case in an Eastern European country. The information suggested that an international child trafficking network was operating in the region, and that several children had been kidnapped and sold to wealthy families around the world. Intrigued and with a sense of responsibility, I decided to investigate the case. With the help of my colleagues at the UN, we began gathering information and working with local authorities to expose the network. It was an arduous and dangerous process, but we were determined to bring the perpetrators to justice. After months of investigation, we managed to dismantle the network and rescue several kidnapped children. The success of the operation was celebrated worldwide, and I received recognition for my work in protecting children's rights. However, the end of this story takes an unexpected turn. During the rescue operation, we discovered that one of the kidnapped children was the son of a wealthy family involved in the child trafficking ring. The boy, a 10-year-old named Lucas, had been kidnapped and sold to a family in another country. What no one knew was that Lucas was actually my younger brother, who had been given up for adoption at birth and from whom I hadn't heard in years. The discovery that Lucas was my brother was an emotional shock, but also an opportunity to reconnect with my family and heal the wounds of the past. With the help of my family and my colleagues at the UN, we worked to reunite Lucas with his biological family and give him the support and love he needed. It was a difficult process, but in the end, we managed to reunite as a family and begin a new chapter in our lives. Today, I continue working to protect children's rights, using my experience and my voice to advocate for those who cannot do so for themselves. Although the journey has been difficult and full of challenges, I know I have made a difference in the lives of many children, and that is what truly matters. And so, with a surprising and emotional ending, my story, as an undercover agent and advocate for children's rights, continues, filled with hope and determination to make the world a better place for all children.